You know, if there's one system I'm upset I never got to grow up with, it would be the Sega Dreamcast. I can't really put it into words, but whether it's the aesthetic of the console or the way it seemed ahead of the curve in so many ways to its contemporaries, I find myself really appealed to it. It also had an amazing library of games to play. You got your classics like Shenmue and Sonic Adventure, but you also have those more obscure and uniquely creative titles that a lot of people look at fondly, like Space Channel 5 and Super Magnetic Neo. This is also where my favorite game of all time had its series start. Yeah, I'm not gonna mention the Dreamcast without bringing up Jet Set Radio. The Dreamcast is also home to a buttload of hidden gems that never got to see English releases, just making an already obscure assortment of games even harder to come across. But there was one Japan-only Dreamcast release that Western fans did get a chance to enjoy. Almost. It's Rent-A-Hero number 1. Believe it or not, this game is actually a remake of a Genesis game that never got an official release in the West either, but more on that later. So how did we almost get this game in the West? Well, after the failure of the Dreamcast, Sega announced they would stop producing units in 2001 and restructure as third-party game developers for all platforms. And since this was at a time when Sega was all buddy-buddy with Microsoft, they decided to make a port of Rent-A-Hero for the Xbox. This port saw a release in Japan and was planned to come out in the West with a full English translation as well, but was cancelled close to release because the publishers, AIA, went under. Allegedly. I can't find any hard confirmation, but everywhere I check reports that's the reason why this game never saw an official Western release. I'm inclined to believe them too, because when I search for AIA, I see the last game they've published was Pinball Tycoon for the Game Boy Advance back in 2003. They also localized Dillbleed, which is pretty cool. Only a few game magazines managed to play this version of the game because they were sent some review copies. And as for the common filth, well, it was looking like we were out of luck. Until one day in 2008 when a prototype of the Xbox localization of Rent-A-Hero number 1 leaked online. And while that version is playable, it's really not the best localization ever. This leaked prototype would only be the beginning of the quintessential way to play this game in English though. In 2021, a modder named VincentNL announced he was starting work on a translation of the original Japanese Dreamcast game, and together with his team of helpers called Rent-A-Modders, they would translate thousands of lines to English to enjoy this game on its original hardware. They used a mixture of both the Xbox translation and their own translation to stay as close to the original Dreamcast version as possible, and in May of 2023, their English patch finally got to see the light of day. But mind you, this is not just a translation. These guys went above and beyond by adding some quality of life improvements, some subtitles for the opening and ending songs, a debug menu, new VMU animations, and a few updated textures. A lot of time and passion was put into this hack, so I'm gonna put links to everyone who worked on this mod below. But I haven't even really talked about what this game is all about yet, and now that we can play it, it's time for me to review it and see how it holds up. The game starts with your family who recently moved into a new neighborhood hosting a small party for all your neighbors. And after a short speech from your father, he tells you to introduce yourself to your neighbors and see how everyone's doing. Now, something you're gonna notice immediately is that you can't control the player with the analog stick at all, and there's not a lot of camera control here either. To be fair, it's a game on the Dreamcast which only has one analog stick, so this is to be expected. But other games found ways to compensate with the lack of camera control, like giving the player a button to snap the camera behind them. I think a button for this function could have easily been binded to the left trigger. You do use that trigger to sprint, but you can also sprint by double tapping in any direction, so giving the player 2 ways to run faster just seems like a missed opportunity for a better camera in my opinion. It's not a game-breaking issue, just something that's gonna take some getting used to. Anyways, after a back and forth between your mom and dad because food is running low, your father tells you to order some food for delivery, which we get from Service Cafe. Also, when we place our order, we win some sort of bonus prize that the person on the phone is kind of fishy about, but whatever. So we wait for the food to arrive, talk to dad some more, he gets into a costume to entertain the guests. Oh, and this old guy delivered our food, along with this giant box that has a costume inside of it. Press X to transform. Okay. Hey, look at that. It's like some Super Sentai Ginyu Force Power Ranger shit. I guess our dad wants us to fight to entertain the guests now. Bam, one punch and he's down. He's really down. It turns out we just ruined the vibe of this party, but it's okay because now we have a banging intro. This thing kicks ass. I mean, the energy behind this guy singing the song, the cheesy over-the-top visuals. This is how you get the player excited to play your game. I don't know how you're not supposed to sing along to this song. This is also the perfect way of showing the player what's to come. I mean, for as much as this game is a parody of superhero conventions and tropes, it's just as much a love letter to those types of stories. It also uses a bit of footage from the intro of the Sega Genesis game as well. I thought that was pretty cool. As I was saying before, the vibe of the party is ruined and everyone goes home. But that old guy, his name is Dr. Trouble by the way, shows up again and he explains how the costume works. It turns out this costume enhances the wearer's physical abilities by a lot, which is why we were able to put our dad down so easily. He calls it Super Energy Combat Armor, or Sega for short. He also says he'll rent it to us, but we'll have to work for him as a rent-a-hero. Basically, we do typical hero stuff for pay and use the money we get from our jobs to continue using the armor. Of course we say yes, and the old man hands us a machine called the Chromecast. There's a lot of puns in this game. We hook the Chromecast up to our TV, and then we're able to read emails and find clients who need a hero. And that's pretty much how the game starts. I guess I'll talk a bit more about this Chromecast we just got first. Its primary function is to give the player jobs, which are basically the missions of the game. These can range from patrolling the city to fight some bad guys, to literally playing delivery man and bringing people some food or groceries. You also have more serious jobs like defusing hydrogen bombs and fighting ancient supernatural mass. Also, after a successful job, you'll get an email from the client or whoever else you met along the way. You can repeat some of the easier jobs like food delivery or the hero show where you just get paid to beat up a bunch of bad guys in front of kids to make some quick cash. You get paid very well for these jobs, by the way. A lighter job will give you about 2,000 gold, but you can typically expect to be paid more than that from the main story jobs. You can use your gold to buy your expected healing items and various other things, but you also need to buy a lot of batteries to power your suit. This combat armor comes at the cost of you having to be on top of its battery power, which you can see at the bottom of the screen next to your health. Whenever you're in the suit, it'll slowly drain its power, and if you use certain moves in combat, you'll lose a lot of battery power as well. The good news is, you can buy as many of these energy tanks as you want. They increase your battery power by a fair bit, and after buying a shit ton of energy tanks, I ended the game with about 400 something battery points compared to the measly 60 I started with. And another thing you're gonna have to stay on top of is the suit's rental fee. Periodically, the game will tell you, your rent is due, come pay us 400 gold or whatever, but that fee is so small it's very unlikely you'll ever miss a payment. It does increase throughout the game as you unlock better armor, but it's still nothing you'll ever sweat at. You can either pay your rent in Sega's top secret headquarters, which is located in the bathroom of this cafe, or at one of the two banks in the game. But if you deposit money into a bank account, it'll pay your fee automatically, making this a non-issue. There's also little side quests in this game. My favorites were the ones where you had to give this old guy a lift around town. It didn't pay very well, but it did test your knowledge of the game's map and all its locations. You know, I guess the title of this game has two meanings. You're paying to rent the suit, and the clients are all paying to rent a hero for hire. Even though number 1 has two meanings, as we're regarded as the best hero, and technically we're the first hero to grace this town. Eventually though, Sega as a business grows and you start to see other heroes pop up throughout the game. A couple of notable ones are Ultra Salaryman and Rent-a-Hiroko. Ultra Salaryman sort of acts as your rival throughout the game. He shows up sometimes and tries to take the glory before you can, but it's all in good fun. You can demolish him in this race to save a child dangling from this tower. He even does the superhero gone supervillain thing at one point, and we have to put him down on a fight, and afterwards you learn he was doing all of this against his will. It's one big cliche. Rent-a-Hiroko is a female hero who might be a better superhero than the player even. She often shows up and saves the day or acts as the voice of reason. I noticed in this one job that if you start it with your armor on, you'll have to fight a bad guy robbing this corner store. But if you start it untransformed, she'll take down the bad guy herself instead of you having to fight them. I gotta say though, for as much as Rent-a-Hiroko is used in all the promotional material and packaging of this game, it feels like they barely use her. It was cool whenever she did show up because she could help out with whatever was going on, but going into this game I was expecting her to have a larger presence in the story. In reality, she just kinda shows up every now and then. They do throw in a cheesy kiss between her and the player at the end of the game to make them into a thing, I guess. Besides Sega, a group of top scientists and heroes, there's also multiple other groups of evil mad scientists and supervillains and gangsters in this game. You have a bunch of different factions to keep up with, but it's not really that complicated. Just to name a few, there's the Narco Company, which is led by a totally not evil CEO who works in the shadows with a scientist named Ron King, who himself makes a giant robot that you have to fight at one point. And then there's the Dynamite Dog Heroes, who are just a group of bad guys who managed to take some Sega armor from some Rent-A-Heroes and wreak havoc all across the city. I wish these guys had a little more backstory. They just kinda show up towards the end and you have to deal with them. When you fight them all, you get to see what their living quarters looks like, and that gives them some personality, I guess, but I would have liked more. And finally, there's your typical gangsters who you just fight in random encounters. There's one mission where you ambush all of their leaders and put them into jail. I thought that was pretty fun. Speaking of fun, I haven't even mentioned the meat of the gameplay yet, which is the combat. The combat is fun.
What the fuck?
But definitely flawed. There's some good and bad to it. For starters, the combos are insanely easy to pull off. You just tap A until it finishes, and you can get new combos from sparring with Sagata Sanshiro of all people. These combos usually do enough damage to just demolish the enemy's health bar, but good luck landing a full combo on anyone because your guy will just auto-target random enemies right in front of the person you're trying to hit's face. This game really suffers from not having a way to lock onto the person you're trying to attack. It's not fun being cheated out of a combo and leaving yourself open to be punished because your character wants to hit someone else. Though I suppose there is kind of a silver lining to the auto-targeting. It can be useful for attacking enemies you can't see at all, the ones who spawn in off-screen mostly. Once you take an enemy down, another one will come into the fight, usually from the distance, or from these buildings, which is a nice attention to detail, and sometimes this is done behind your back because you have no camera control and won't see them coming at all. But just spam the attack button, and maybe your character will preemptively take care of them. Maybe. There's a greater chance of them just getting in a cheap shot that might even knock you off your feet. There's also more depth to the combat than just doing these one-button combos. There are ways for you to extend your attacks. Like, some of the combos allow you to launch enemies, and you can follow those up with either another combo, or a dashing attack, or a charge move like the uppercut that lets you continuously juggle enemies in the air. The charge moves are really interesting. If you hold down the X button, you'll see this meter at the top rise, and depending on what level charge you let go on, you'll do special attacks that take up some of your battery power. You can buy these from Sega headquarters, and it's worth experimenting with them all to see what does what and works best for you. As long as I had the 3rd level healing charge, I was good to go. There's also a grab you can do if you just walk up to enemies. I think I got pretty good at taking down all these enemies by the end of the game. I learned to deal with the lack of camera control by using the game's crappy targeting system to my advantage, and I could just abuse the juggling combo to get through everyone pretty fast. But I also realized about halfway through the game that I was getting very little rewards for these fights that only got longer as the game went on. Enemies might have dropped some money or some health for you to pick up after you defeated them, but there was no point to keep getting into these random encounters where I ran the risk of losing more health. This game considers itself an RPG, but think about any other RPG or RPG-inspired game you've ever played. Typically, whenever you finish fighting random bad guys, you'll be rewarded with experience, or money, or both, or at least something that benefits you. And even if it's a negligible amount, the game still rewards you for winning those fights. In Rent-A-Hero, you get next to nothing from these battles. It's as primitive as it gets in that regard. It really feels more like an arcade beat-em-up at times than it does an actual RPG game. Though, I suppose that makes sense when you learn the fighting engine in this game is reused from an actual Sega arcade beat-em-up called Spike Out. I did find fighting in this game fun at first, but it just turned into a nuisance over time. Luckily, there is a way to stop all the random encounters. Just take the armor off at the cost of running from point A to point B a little slower. All of my criticisms stopped being a problem as soon as I learned there's an infinite combo you can do as soon as you unlock this all-striking combo though. Of course I learned this just at the end of the game. Just repeat the first 3 attacks with a little pause in between and no one will be able to touch you. I got through my second playthrough so much faster with this method, and I didn't mind the random fights as much since I could just plow through everyone. Even the bosses weren't terribly difficult. They could escape from hit stun easier than the normal grunts, but just back them into a wall and you're fine. And if you do somehow end up losing, you'll respawn in the hospital with full health. Something else I learned at the very end of the game was if you lose on certain missions, Richterw will complete the jobs for you. Even the final mission, which I was kind of split between being upset with because I didn't get to finish the game myself, but I also found it really humorous how you could get your ass kicked by the final boss and still beat the game technically. Speaking of final bosses, I'm not gonna spoil it. Normally this is the part where I segue into talking more about the game's story and say spoiler warning, but I'm not actually gonna do that this time. This story isn't the deepest, and there's a twist at the end you're gonna see coming from a mile away, but I do want a lot of this game to stay a surprise to anyone who's never played it. So instead of talking more about the game's story, I'll talk more about the other versions of this game.
あの伝説のヒーローが帰ってきた。セガエンタープライゼスからはドリームキャスト用 3D アクション RPG レンタヒーローNo.1が見参だ。
We can start with a version of Richterw that's not actually playable. Thanks to Togepichu, one of the Rent-A-Modders, I was able to come across footage of Richterw No.1 that shows what this game looked like in its beta stage. This was shown off at Japan's V-Jump V Festival in 1999. That's my born year. The HUD differences are obvious, but what really stood out to me is the addition of a mini-map that's completely missing from all versions of the game that we got. That would have really helped in the maze section at the end of the game. The combat also looks like it could have been turn-based in the beta, with these fight scenes having a more dynamic camera, and enemies who aren't attacking the player at all. But this could all just be the result of the developers making this trailer look more cinematic. Who knows? It's a much more vibrant game too. The colors they use in this trailer really pop out compared to how the final game looks, but honestly, I prefer what we ended up with. I could see this becoming an eyesore eventually. But there's not much else to take away from this trailer. It's empty and looks like a game that was in the middle of development, which it was. So next we'll take a look at the original Japanese version of this game. I can barely read this, but it's okay because I had to play this game so many times for this video, I know how to get through it easily enough, at least the beginning of the game. It plays the same mostly, but something I noticed about this version of the game is that a lot of the textures were Japanese originally, which meant the Rent-A-Modders altered those to be in English as well. I'm talking about those little billboards and posters you'd see around town. These were always a treat to read just because they were fun little distractions, but to see they went the extra mile of translating even these to English really put a smile on my face. Just a quick side note, I really love these textures you'd find in these old games. Like, what is this? A child running on a beach with balloons, and it says waste in bold red font at the bottom, and 5 ways in the top right corner. Like, what is this a poster for? Why is it on the college campus? I almost feel like this is a lost art. Something else I noticed playing this version of the game is that it was lacking in those tiny little quality of life improvements that I really took for granted, like the way you have to read emails in this game. In the original, you have to tap the D-pad up and down for each individual line, but in the translation, they added functionality for the analog stick so you could just scroll up and down the emails faster. It's the little improvements like that, but they make the biggest difference. But as far as I can tell, I already went over everything this game offered when I talked about the translation earlier. It's just in Japanese. So next, why don't we take a look at the original Sega Genesis version of Richterw, just titled Richterw. This was also Japan only and received a fan translation of its own in 2021. I only played this game for about an hour, but I think I got the gist of this version of the game. It starts the same, but one notable difference is that you have to pay rent for the suit as soon as you get it in this game. In Richterw No.1, Dr. Trouble gives you a little trial period with the suit at the start, so you don't have to worry about money as much, but they want their money right away here. The main takeaway I had from playing this version of the game was that the Dreamcast remake is pretty faithful to the original. The mission structure and jobs seem the same, but instead of using a Creamcast, you just use your computer instead. Like I said though, I only played it for about an hour, so I don't know how much it differs from the Dreamcast remake towards the end. There's the intro I mentioned earlier. It's probably one of the best ones I've ever seen for a Genesis game. I'm not really doing this version of the game justice since this is just a quick overview, but if I ever do decide to replay this game in the future, I'll make a full video on it just as well. It's deserving of one. And finally, there's the unreleased but leaked Xbox prototype of Rent-A-Hero. Going in, I was fully expecting this version of the game to be broken or unplayable, but this game seems to work just fine. The intro here is definitely worse. They recreated some of the scenes for the worse and completely removed the vocals. That's a huge letdown in my opinion. Even if most people playing this version of the game wouldn't have understood the lyrics, I think just having that energy in the opening would have been enough to get them excited. As for the gameplay differences, I noticed a few errors with the text and HUD elements being all chopped up, but that could have just as well been my emulator settings not being set up properly for this game. I also only played this version of the game for about an hour before stopping, but the game crashed on me and I didn't save and I was too lazy to start all over. But up until that point, everything worked just fine. Also, I did kind of know what to expect later on in the game. According to Togepichu, they pretty much had to localize the game themselves because the Xbox translation took a lot of liberties when it came to certain things, and the entire game wasn't finished being translated. So basically, the prototype was a good starting point for the Dreamcast translation, but it wasn't good enough. The Xbox version also has Battle Mode. Now, as much as I was shitting on the combat earlier, I really enjoyed Battle Mode. Here you redo pretty much every fight in the game, from your dad in the dinosaur outfit to the final boss. I noticed a little change in this guy's design. It's for the best. You can buy upgrades in a shop here too, and I mean as soon as you have enough money to buy the combo that lets you infinitely attack enemies, you pretty much break the game. You can also buy these RH cards that work like a gacha. For each one you buy, there's a chance you'll unlock something new in the gallery. The gallery is also new to this game. Here you can see some bonus art and some character designs before they were finalized, and read some comics, and there's even a model viewer for all the characters in the game. There's even pictures of what looks like Rent-A-Hero merch. I really like looking at all this art. You get a bit more character just by scrolling through it all. Like here's Rent-A-Hero having to take public transportation and getting pointed at. And here's what Dr. Trouble would have looked like in the combat armor. Here you can see the poor guy still gets scolded by his mom. And I mean, that looks like a bunch of check marks to me, but he still scored a 0, huh? And here you can see being a hero isn't all stopping bank robberies. You gotta find a lost pet or two sometimes. And I love this one in particular where he's studying English while making a food delivery. That's a thing that I wish was more prevalent in the game story, having to juggle between your normal life and your hero life. There are points throughout the game where you won't be able to complete an objective as a hero, but need to switch into your normal outfit to get the job done. But it would have been nice if they went even further with that. That's pretty much it for the Xbox version though. Hell, that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about without spoiling Rent-A-Hero. I guess I can show off the top secret debug mode too. Once you get far enough in this game, you'll learn this button combination that teaches you how to access the debug menu. And you know, you can do all the expected stuff, like teleport to any location, give yourself any item, and break the game with One Punch Man mode. It's cute how the pause screen changes when this is toggled as well. And this is a really nice reward for getting far enough in the game. But that would be Rent-A-Hero. It's a fun enough game. It took me between 8 and 9 hours to beat on my first playthrough, but it didn't feel that long at all. I enjoyed getting through the entire game so much that I didn't really mind the flaws. This game had me laughing my ass off on multiple occasions too. The humor ranges from basic parodies to campy cliches to absurd visual gags to straight up slapstick, and all of it works for me. My biggest issue with this game was with the combat and random encounters, but it was more of an annoyance I learned to deal with than something that ruined the entire experience. I'm still sure it'll be something I consider for future playthroughs though. Now, while I was researching Rent-A-Hero for this video, I learned there were talks of a Rent-A-Hero film being in the works at one point, but the last time we got any updates on it was the date it was announced back in 2016, so don't hold your breath for a film anytime soon. I think there's potential for a sequel to Rent a Hero right in this game though. There's one job in this game where you have to find a little girl who needs heart surgery, and you find her at a hero show because she looks up to heroes and wants to be one. And she bonds with this kid named Gabe, who happens to be the son of that totally not evil CEO I mentioned earlier. And he could work as her sidekick with a tragic backstory or something. I'm just saying, if they ever decide to bring Rent a Hero back in the future, they have the perfect groundwork right here. And once again, I want to thank Vincent and the Rent-A-Modders for all their work. I never would have played this game, or probably even have come across it if it weren't for all of you guys. I love it when these older, obscure games still have strong, dedicated communities. Thankfully, Sega is so lenient with fan projects too. Not that any other company would have stopped the Rent-A-Modders in their tracks with a cease and desist or something while they were making this mod, but I have to imagine they weren't as worried making this translation knowing this is a Sega property, because Sega is usually fine with stuff like this as long as the project isn't being monetized. But hey, just between you and me, if you do enjoy this game, or just want to thank Vincent for his work, you can donate at one of the links below. Like I said before, I'm gonna put links to everyone who helped work on this mod below. Buy them a coffee, you know? Do the hero thing. Hey everyone, it's Cosmo. If you didn't know, I played this game live as I recorded it for this video, and if you want to see what games I record to make videos on in the future, you can follow me on Twitch. I don't have a streaming schedule, but I'll give you a hint for what the next game I make a video on will be. Would you like a room? No one's gonna get that.